pen may beat a path to plowshares, pen beat plowshares into swords, in words from plowshare and the sword. And pen enshrine, and pen unmask the lies of vain mythologies, pen enthrone the moldy claims of power, urge contested spaces as divinely given. Pen prove mighty ear of swords, glory tongue of gory deeds, dress rape in fame, plunder in time-honored robes of epic deeds. The pen may dip in inkwell and emerging drip with blood. Precious stones adorn their tongues of rote, of cant, of sterile incantation. Show me the waterbeds they lie upon, pull the plug, and puzzle why the flow is darkened red and thick and clotted. Eternally in swarm as locusts, as lies and flies, consorts drawn to dark orgies of commemorating pens. Long is the line of great seductions, leer of ease within our checkered tribe, from griot of voice to plume and the compact processor. Some we have come to know. They served and were served in turn. Some believed, and others cashed their souls for make-believe. But both are immunized against the testament of eyes and ears, the stench and guilt of power, an anomy of reddening rain, of plagues of locusts, deaths of firstborns, 7 lean years, and yet again the 8th and sequent round of death and dearth. A pledge not earned or given is not in mortals to redeem. But God decreed the end shall multiply the means. A seasoned waiter, the pen inscribes, we also serve.
Las alternativas a la guerra, al no sustento y a las injusticias sociales y económicas se están convirtiendo en un imperativo de la supervivencia. Estas alternativas deben impulsar prácticas armónicas con el planeta y fomentar la solidaridad y la hermandad entre los pueblos, las culturas. Lo uno no es posible sin lo otro. La crisis global de la actualidad es consecuencia de las exclusiones ecológicas y económicas. La seguridad no se puede basar en grandes presupuestos militares y en estados policiales más fuertes. Se debe basar en la seguridad ecológica, la seguridad económica, la seguridad cultural y la democracia real. Así nos lo dice nuestra invitada de esta mañana de hoy, Vandana Shiva, en su libro La democracia de la Tierra. Reciban un fraternal y caluroso saludo a este nuevo acto del 32º Festival Internacional de Poesía de Medellín. Es muy significativo que hoy nos acompañe desde la República Milenaria de la India, Vandana Shiva, la gran mujer luchadora por la paz y por la paz con la naturaleza, quien intervendrá con la conferencia Democracia de la Tierra por un mundo sostenible y sin guerra. Hoy tengo el gusto de acompañarles en esta conversación previamente grabada con Vandana Shiva, ya que ella para esta fecha estaba de viaje. Nuestro agradecimiento a quienes nos acompañan esta mañana del 20 de julio en los actos del festival que se celebrarán en el día de hoy. Como saben, nos acompañan 135 poetas, pensadores, artistas que este año alimentan la llama de la poesía por un mundo sin guerra, por el cuidado de la vida y de la naturaleza. Nuestro festival es convocado y organizado por la revista Prometeo y el Movimiento Poético Mundial, auspiciado por la Alcaldía de Medellín y la Secretaría de Cultura Ciudadana, apoyado por el Ministerio de Cultura en su Programa Nacional de Concertación Cultural, por el Global Campus for Human Rights y por la Fundación Right Livelihood. Vandana Shiva nació en India. Además de física, ecologista, activista, editora y autora de numerosos libros, Vandana es una incansable defensora del medio ambiente. Desde su condición de mujer, es fundadora de Navdanya, un movimiento para la conservación de la biodiversidad y los derechos de los agricultores. También es la fundadora y directora de la Fundación de Investigación para la Política de Ciencia, Tecnología y Recursos Naturales. Shiva lucha por los cambios en la práctica y los paradigmas de la agricultura y la alimentación. No quiero vivir en un mundo donde 5 empresas gigantes controlen nuestra salud y nuestra alimentación, nos dice. Ha ayudado a organizaciones de base del movimiento verde en África, América Latina, Asia, Irlanda, Suiza y Austria con campañas contra la ingeniería genética. Shiva también se ha desempeñado como asesora de gobiernos de la India y otros, así como en organizaciones no gubernamentales, incluido el Foro Internacional sobre Globalización, la Organización de Mujeres para el Medio Ambiente y el Desarrollo, la Red del Tercer Mundo y la Red de Medio Ambiente de los Pueblos de Asia-Pacífico. En 1993 fue merecedora del Premio Right Livelihood, también ha ganado la Orden Arca Dorada, el Premio Global 500 de la ONU, el Premio Internacional del Día de la Tierra, la beca Lennon ONU para la Paz y el Premio de la Paz de Sydney 2010. En 2003, la revista Time la identificó como un héroe ambiental y Asia Week la ha llamado una de las 5 comunicadoras más poderosas de Asia. Así que es un gran placer que ella esté con nosotros. Escuchémosla hoy en un primer saludo hacia el festival y un mensaje hacia el pueblo colombiano.
I send I abandoned I send my loving greetings to the people of Colombia, and we have watched from far away how much you have borne the burden of the greed of the world, the worst mining corporations, the worst poison corporations wanting to spray glyphosate and Roundup on your sacred coca. I have watched how warriors, including women warriors, have been killed, defending the land, defending their biodiversity, defending their territories. So I send you greetings of solidarity and the hope that the new government will reflect the voices of the ground and actually create a true earth democracy in that beautiful, rich, diverse land of Colombia.
Nosotros también lo esperamos y estamos seguros que así sucederá con los nuevos nombramientos que se han sabido en el día de ayer. Uno de los pilares de los pensamientos de Vandana es el pensamiento crítico al concepto moderno de desarrollo y de ciencia que ha implicado nefastos efectos para el planeta Tierra y todo lo viviente, abriendo la puerta a un mundo muerto, infrahumano y artificial cubierto de desechos de la naturaleza. Por favor, háblanos sobre lo que motivó a abandonar la física cuántica y dedicarte al activismo, lo que te convierte en una incansable luchadora por la paz mundial.
I abandoned the practice as a daily research of quantum theory, but I haven't abandoned the quantum worldview, the worldview of non-separation. I did my PhD on non-locality in quantum theory. In the quantum world, nothing is separated. In the mechanical world, everything is a separate atom in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Potential, there's nothing fixed. You know, we're repeatedly told women are inferior, indigenous people are primitive. All of these adjectives are essentializing certain qualities that the colonizers have put on us. We are all potential. Every organism is potential in the making, and the context defined. And that's why I'm so happy to join this festival at this moment of your new elected democracy, that now the potential of true democracy will be realized. The earlier was a vote given to those who constantly worked for the extractors, the plunderers.
Mm-hmm.
There is another very big quality of the quantum worldview, that there is no excluded middle, because everything is interconnected. How can you chop up interconnected beings? We are all interbeings. And again, because everything is a potential, the potential can go this way and the potential can go that way. Therefore, there is uncertainty. There's nothing like determinism. I know this is the way it will be. So it creates a world of humility. It creates a world of interconnectedness. And I chose my life's journey to study deeply in quantum theory because I was not satisfied with the way we were told the world works in the mechanical worldview, what I call the mechanical worldview. Whether it be the mechanical worldview in physics or in biology or in society, as Margaret Thatcher said, there's nothing like a society, there's only individuals. And then we were all made consumers. Well, as indigenous cultures know, we are communities. We are not individuals. Our collective shapes our being. The earth shapes our being. Why am I so critical of development and the dominant way science is imposed on the world? The word development is a biological term. A fetus grows into an adult. You were a fetus in your mother's womb. That is development. And that development carries within it the self-organization, the patterns and forms and structures of living systems in different phases of life. A seed does not look like the plant it will become, but it has in it the potential for development into an oak tree from an acorn, or a coconut tree from a coconut. And a coconut doesn't become an acorn, you know? It is built into its internal patterns of unfolding, as a quantum theorist David Bohm would put it so beautifully. There is an implicate order in the world which becomes explicated as circumstances change. That is development. The word development, used as an economic phenomenon, was imposed on the world literally on the day 20th of January 1949. This is when Harry Truman became president of the US, and he declared that countries like ours were underdeveloped. Now, it is true, countries like, Colombia, India, we were colonized countries, and we were robbed of our wealth and resources. But we were not underdeveloped as being in a lower state of social organization, of intellectual organization, of cultural organization. In fact, it's because we were so rich that the colonizers came to our land and robbed us of our gold and silver and our spices and our textile. Now, the date 49 is a very important date because 47, India became independent. We told the British, it's time for you to leave, quit India. And we started to write policies for freedom. We started to write decolonial policies of how we would both undo the harm of colonialism. In India, we had a particularly vicious colonialism that allowed the land to be taken over, by one little line. The British decided that the land of India belonged to them, and therefore the peasants of India who were taking care of the land now had to pay them taxes. And these taxes were so heavy, they were half the produce in cash. You know, we weren't a commodity producing economy. This led then to two phenomena. $45 trillion was transferred from India to UK. And I'm sure if a similar calculation was done for Colombia, there would be huge amounts earlier transferred to Spain and now transferred to the United States. 45 trillion of our wealth went, but it went from the peasants. What happened to the peasants? They went hungry. 40 to 60 million people died of hunger and famine, not because there was no food. They had produced the food, but they couldn't access it because it was going as taxes. And the last big famine was the Great Bengal Famine of 42. And then we absolutely decided no more of this kind of exploitation. We created land reform. We created systems of universal entitlement to food. We created a democracy. We created a constitution. And the rich, powerful countries got worried about the decolonization and freedom movements of the southern countries. So the word development was invented by Mr. Truman. And around that same time in 44, they created three institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, and the GATT, which were called the Bretton Woods institutions, because they were created by these rich, powerful men getting together in a hotel in Bretton Woods in New Brunswick, in the United States. So before the wars ended, they created a structure to control the World Bank, to get us into debt with development projects, and then lock us all into constantly only working to pay them debt. It also increased the inequality. The process of development, in my early books I've written, $1 loaned to the southern countries by the World Bank creates $3 of business for the rich countries. So we get poorer because we are paying the companies, the corporations of the rich countries. And the figures are there. In 1960, the difference between the North and the South that had been impoverished by colonialism, was 20-fold. But by 1980, it had become 46 times difference. And that's why we constantly get deeper into poverty. And then more of our resources are taken to pay the debt. And right now we have 10 billionaires controlling half the wealth of the world. And they have created new asset management companies called, basically asset management company like BlackRock, Vanguard, who are really wanting to make more money, because this whole system is a machine for extracting resources from former colonies after colonialism got over. That's why I have resisted development as recolonization. I have resisted globalization and the rules of WTO, which I have worked on, line by line. I have worked with my government to ensure that we would not be trapped in a new colonization. What we've seen is our agriculture, our seeds, and our food locked in to create junk food, so all our people are sick. Patents on seed, GMOs, and trade that has left such a large part of the world dependent on imports, and when you don't have the money to import, you have hunger. This is the real reason for the growing hunger in the world. So we, of course, should have indigenous ecological evolution. If development is used for that, I'm fully for it. But if it's used for Mr. Truman's version of declaring us underdeveloped, someone who's exploited is not underdeveloped, they're exploited. If they're dominated, they're not underdeveloped, they're dominated. So we need more honesty. Then you also asked about science. Well, I'm a scientist. I'm passionate about knowledge. I have behind me sitting the person who inspired me, Einstein. I've sculpted that bust of Einstein because Einstein showed me the way. And he was among those who did true knowledge. He gave us real knowledge. Science means to know, siere, to know. Every indigenous person who knows their forest is a scientist. Every woman who knows her children and takes care of them is a scientist. Every healer is a scientist. What is being paraded as science today is just like colonialism left us poor, and forcing new colonialism on us as development is not freedom, it is new colonialism. In a very similar way, what is called science today, which is mechanical, reductionist, science that subjugates nature, dominates nature, declared that women have no knowledge, burnt women as witches in Europe, you know, on the papal bull, 1484, before the Columbus papal bull, you know, 10 years before, they were killing people. 9 million Europeans were killed for knowledge of being part of nature. That was treated as heresy. We had to be separated from nature. And this separation then was put into frozen form by people like Descartes, who said the world is a machine. I'm a thinking thing without a body. Or Mr. Bacon, who was the Chancellor of England, is called the father of modern science, wrote a book, The Birth of Masculine Time. Yeah? That time before that we are part of nature was effeminate. But now he was going to create a class of supermen who would dominate nature, who would exploit nature and turn her into a slave. And Mr. Bacon was also in charge of the Inquisition in England. You know, he was the one putting witches on the stakes and burning them. And he was treating nature in the same way of interrogation, with the same level of violence. So I have no time for this as science. I would just call it a domination over nature, violence against nature. We now are much clearer. There's a quantum world and a mechanical world. There's an ecological way of thinking and a reductionist way of thinking. There's a way of having ecological democracy and epistemic democracy, that we respect the knowledge of everyone, rather than a few people paid by big corporations, you know, all the people who were paid by Monsanto and Bayer to say glyphosate is safe. It is now being exposed then. You know, the EPA has been hauled up by the Supreme Court of the United States saying, you lied and said it did not cause cancer, and they've had to go back. Bayer tried to get freedom from all the cases on cancer, and there too they have lost. So it is now showing so clearly that there is a practice that is not science. It is related to commercial interests of making claims so that you can have exploitation. As Caroline Merchant wrote a book called The Death of Nature, she's this mechanical reductionist view of the world was very, very good for colonial commercial exploitation. So when you say the nature is dead and say she's just raw material, of course you can have more and more mines and you can destroy more and more indigenous lands. It's only the ecological world view that lets you know the relationships. And that science is the science of the future. It's the science of the ancient people, but also the science of the future. So I am not against ecological development of life, and I'm not against science of systems and ecological interconnected, but I am totally against the fraud of enslaving us again and trying to enslave nature and calling that science. It is a discredit to the word knowledge. And I see, you know, because I've looked so much, I try and understand, why are they doing this? Why are they destroying the forests for timber mines? Why are they destroying the biodiversity of agriculture for chemical crops or for GMOs? And I realized that part of what has happened is an epistemicide, you know. We talk of ecocide, the killing of the earth. We talk of genocide, the killing of people of the earth. But I think part of this has been an epistemicide, killing other knowledges that are so needed in our times of collapse, of extinction, and on inequality. We need the knowledges of oneness and interconnectedness.
Gracias por focalizar los conceptos de globalización, recolonización, que no es más que explotación, e introducir aquellos de desarrollo indígena y ecológico. Una de tus principales fuentes de inspiración fue la de emprender tu proyecto de cuidado de las semillas y surge en 1987 a partir de tu asistencia a la conferencia sobre biotecnología, leyes de la vida, en la que te percataste que la vida estaba monopolizada y privatizada por grandes corporaciones. Para plasmar tu visión en acción, creaste Navdanya, que significa 9 semillas. Por favor, háblanos un poco de esta experiencia, Vandana.
Yeah, you earlier asked why I gave up an academic and research career to become an activist. And the beginnings of that really are the fact that while I was still doing my PhD in Canada, a movement had started in my country, and I grew up in the forests of the Himalaya, and I saw the forest disappear. So this movement was a women's movement who came out and said, we're going to hug the trees. We won't let you cut the trees. You'll have to kill us before you kill the trees. And of course, this is an ancient tradition in India. In the 1700s, a woman called Amrita Devi led a similar campaign, and about 270 people died protecting the sacred tree of the desert. But in the 70s, it was protecting the forests of the Himalaya, which are vital because we get, like Colombia, we get very heavy rain. And if you don't have a forest, we have landslides. And once you have landslides and you have floods and you have droughts, life is impossible. So women were basically understanding the ecology. And they said these forests are not timber mines. They are the sources of soil, water, and air. They were understanding the ecological value of forests. 84, violence started in the place where I had done my MSc honors in particle physics, Punjab. This is where the Green Revolution, which is the name for chemical industrial agriculture, was first experimented with. In the 60s, it was imposed on Punjab. The richest land, land of 5 rivers, prosperous people, hardworking farmers. But by 84, they had ruined the land. The soils were dying, the rivers were dying, the farmers were dying, were in debt, and the farmers rose in revolt. So I asked the United Nations, with whom I was doing a consulting, I said, there's something going on here that needs to be studied. And that same year in the city of Bhopal, the worst industrial disaster took place, where a gas leaked from a pesticide plant and killed thousands and is still killing people all these years later. So I said, I must study this. And I did a book called The Violence of the Green Revolution. And I understood then that when you change a plant to put chemicals, you first of all create monocultures because you destroy the capacity of plants to work in coexistence and partnership. Just like in societies, we are destroying the capacities of cultural diversity in the world. And I also knew that while they talk only about the grain of these dwarf varieties and don't talk about all the productivity that has been lost, they don't talk about the soil that's destroyed, the 10 times more water you're going to use. They don't talk about the toxics that will be left. So when I went to this meeting that you mentioned, the Laws of Life conference, which I was invited to because of that book, the same chemical companies that had given us the agri-chemicals were now talking about genetic engineering, GMOs, and patents. And they said, we have to do genetic engineering in order to own the seed and prevent farmers from having access to seed, so that all seed in the world by the year 2000 was their dream, will be GMO seeds owned and patented by us, and the farmers will have to pay royalty to us. Now, I'd studied the Green Revolution, so I understood that if you change the genes of a plant, it's going to do something to that organism, and it's going to do something to the environment. And we must look at that. But I also had studied my own country's history, that like the British took the rent on land by saying this land is our property, the Monsantos of the world, calling land seeds their intellectual property, were going to take revenues and taxes from the peasants. And I knew this would mean absolute crisis for our small farmers. So I did 2 things. The first thing I did was I started to work with our government, our parliament, and we said, on the basis of our basic knowledge, that plants, animals, seeds are our relatives. We are part of an earth family. In India, we even have a beautiful phrase for it called Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. I said, how can you start declaring our relatives as your property. And so we put in our law, Article 3J, and I feel so grateful that I had the opportunity to work with brilliant parliamentarians. And this clause says, plants, animals, and seeds are not human inventions, and therefore cannot be patented. This is the way we prevented the Monsanto monopoly in India, even though they still tried with BT cotton illegally, illegitimately, and therefore we had to fight many cases with them. And the last one was about 3 years ago, just before COVID, where they were still trying to say we invent the seed, we create the seed. And they're standing, the lawyers saying, we are the Superman, we create Superman seed. Second thing we said, because by then I had started enough, work, I said, but the farmers are the first breeders. We took one grass and turned it into 200,000 varieties of rice, just like the corn of the Latin America. Out of one teosinte became the amazing diversity of corn. This is breeding. So our agriculture minister used to hear me speak, and he said, help us write a law so that the monopoly is not of the corporation. We have farmers' rights. So we wrote a law called Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act. We put into our law that farmers are the breeders and have a right. Now, this law became extremely important because about 4 years ago, Pepsi, the cold drink company, sued Indian farmers for saving potato seeds. Because, Pepsi sells those Lay's chips. And therefore, they, like Monsanto tries to own the seed, Pepsi owns the potato seed. And some farmers had saved the seeds of what they had grown. And Pepsi sued them for 10 million rupees each, 4 farmers, 10 million each. And when I saw this in the newspaper, I found out who was the lawyer defending the farmers. And I sent him this book. It's a fat book on all of our work on biodiversity, seeds, intellectual property. It's called Origins in India, and in the United States is published as Reclaiming the Commons. And I hope at some point there'll be a Spanish edition. So I found out the lawyer. I contacted him. I said, listen, they don't have this right because farmers have the right to save, exchange seed, and no one can interfere in that right. And I sent this book to the judges and the lawyer. And the case was forced to be withdrawn by Pepsi. But on the one side, we did the legal protections. And it's not over because these companies are so greedy. They will still continue. I know about, I don't know, it must be about 8-9 years ago, there was the US-Colombia Central America Treaty, and they were going to prevent farmers from saving seeds. And people in Colombia asked me support, and we did support them for the right to save seeds. And I know they didn't get through with this criminalization of the highest duty of farmers, which is to save seeds. So I started to save seeds after that meeting. On the flight back, I decided I'm not going to do anything else. I'll give up my work on dams and rivers and forests to other people who are well equipped to do it. But no one's looking at seed. I didn't know how to save seeds. So I pulled out my parents' books and I started to go to the villages where I'd worked with the Chipko women and said, do you grow this? Do you grow this? I found out what they grow. I said, save it. Don't let it be destroyed. By 91, I realized, 2 legs and 1 human being could not prevent the huge assault of monocultures and destruction that was taking place. So by 91, I created the institution called Navdanya. And the Navdanya, as you said, means 9 seeds, but it also means the new gift. The 9 seeds, of course, is the highest diversity. You can't go beyond 9. After that, you become 1 and 0. Yeah? You can't go higher than 9. Everything else is a combination of all lower digits. So it's the highest diversity, but it also means the new gift, Naya Dan, which for us is reclaiming the seed as the commons from this urge of 4 corporations to want to own the last life form on this world. And these are the poison makers. I call them the Poison Cartel. They worked in Hitler's Germany to make gases to kill people in concentration camps. They're the ones who made explosives and ammunitions with the same processes that give us nitrogen fertilizers. That's why you have so much fertilizer bombs. They're the same people who know the skill of killing. And now they wanted to call themselves the life sciences industry. I said, you don't know anything about life. You know how to destroy life. And we will build the movements to defend life, celebrate life in its diversity, and defend our cultures that have defended life in its diversity. So Navdanya continues. We've created more than 150 community seed banks. We've saved more than 4,000 varieties of rice, some that can tolerate salt when the floods come and when the cyclones come. The farmers can rejuvenate the agriculture. Seeds that are so drought tolerant that with a few drops of rain that will give you food, particularly the millets that were called primitive, like we were called primitive. Millets were called primitive grains, and they were pushed out of cultivation. We call them forgotten foods that will be future foods. And I feel so happy. Next year is the year of millets for the United Nations, 2023. So we have, with our love and effort over all these years, managed to bring visibility to the seed, visibility to farmers' knowledge, and visibility to the connection that the native seeds are the true seeds. They give you nourishment, they're climate resilient, that the new seeds are seeds of greed and exploitation, and they turn something that's totally renewable into a non-renewable source. So a tomato seed gives you 1,500 varieties of tomatoes, 1,000 seeds. That's abundance. Monsanto's GMO seeds will not give you a second seed. So it is an economy of scarcity, and it is an economy of destruction. And that's why when I worked to say, what are the impacts? When I asked them at this meeting, what are the impacts? They said, we can't look, because if we look, we won't make money. So I started to define the idea of biosafety. And then the United Nations appointed me. We managed to get into the Convention on Biological Diversity, Article 19.3 on biosafety. The UN appointed me on an expert group to make the framework. And I want to congratulate the Colombians, not just for your new elections, but you gave the world the international law to regulate GMOs, the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. You must take pride in it, and you must defend it. And you must ensure other countries who have signed to it do not deregulate the new GMOs.
Gracias, Vandana. Es evidente que en Colombia hay muchos luchadores por el medio ambiente que han pagado, muchos de ellos con sus vidas. Todas tus palabras hablan del amor por la vida y de la necesidad que hay de cuidarla. Acorde a tu libro, Abrazar la vida, se hace visible lo esencial de una mujer en el cuidado del planeta y, por lo tanto, en la supervivencia. ¿Cuál es el sentido del ecofeminismo y cómo avanza tu influencia en la preservación de la vida planetaria, la paz y la sostenibilidad de la vida?
You know, when we started the conversation, Gloria, we talked about how what's called the dominant science actually destroyed real science, declared knowledgeable women experts as witches and killed them. So basically what happened was, with colonialism, with globalization, with economic development, with greed, society was turned into a divided society where the men were pulled out for the mines and the plantations and the warfare. But life had to go on. And even though it was not in the economic enterprise, it was not what the colonizers were thinking about, but who was bringing the food, who was bringing the water? It was the women who continued to practice the economy of life, which in my view is the true economy. Because Aristotle has defined two economies, yeah? Oikonomia is the art of living. Chrematistics is the art of money making. What we call today economy is merely the colonial enterprise of extractivism and the art of money making by destroying nature, destroying people's rights to convert it into someone's raw material, someone's resource, and someone's profit. It is not economy. Economy comes from oikos, our home. Our home's knowledge is ecology, and women are the top experts of knowing how the home works. Economy is the management of the home. And even when the women's knowledge and work has been denied, the true economy was being looked after by them. Whether it is growing food, I've done book, I got an award from the FAO and I did my whole speech on what women are doing in agriculture. On 2% land, women grow 50% of the food. Because women grow food for their families, for their communities, whereas the 50% land is growing commodities in a very ecologically wasteful way to supply to the global world, not for food alone, because in your part of the world, look at how the Amazon is being destroyed, not by the indigenous people, but to grow GMO soya bean, GM soya to feed animals in factory farms, GM soya to make biofuel, sugarcane to make biofuel. Now, this is not the economy. Economy is about life. It's the art of living. And women have maintained the art of living even when it was forgotten in the dominant system. And now when life itself is under threat, at a time where extinction is the dominant concern for everyone, we're pushing 200 species to extinction every day with the kind of extinction technologies we've created. You know, what is Roundup? Roundup is an extinction technology. Just kill the plants, kill the bees, kill the earthworms. And this extinction technology has brought us to the brink where we have lost about 80% of all insects, 90% of all cultivated varieties. We've lost so much diversity of cultures, of languages, because extraction takes out from an ecosystem, but then it wants to multiply what they find valuable. So if they find eucalyptus valuable for pulp, then they'll replace a rainforest with a eucalyptus plantation. So monocultures becomes the way. If they find GMO soya is where they get the profits and royalties, they will destroy indigenous farms for GM soya and GMO corn. For me, ecofeminism is a very simple understanding that capitalist patriarchy, which was colonialism, declared that nature is dead, women are a second sex and property and objects, and the creation is done by capital. But capital is a mere construct. It cannot create. The creativity is done by nature and women and workers and peasants, those who manage life, those who cultivate and renew and regenerate life. So ecofeminism is removing the blinkers of false creativity, of appropriation and extraction, and celebrating life in nature, in society, and for the future. This is the economy of care I talked about. I've just written a book called From Greed to Care, been released in Italy. And quite clearly, if we have to survive in the future, we will have to have an economy of care. And if we have to have an economy of care, women will have to be the leaders for this transition. And I often say, either if we leave the economy and the future in the hands of those who've given us ecocide and genocide and femicide, we will not have a future. The future rests on it being womanly and of nature. Nature and women have to come to the center of our thinking and our consciousness for us to cultivate a future for all. Ecofeminism is not just for women. Ecofeminism is an economy, an ecology, and knowledge of care, and epistemology of care for all beings. Therefore, it is about respect and love for the indigenous people who have shown us how with only 25% of the land, they have conserved 80% of the biodiversity. So that is the way to the future.
Muchas gracias por todos estos conceptos que pones en un lugar claro y que nos aclaran muchas situaciones de la vida cotidiana. Queremos que nos hablaras de otro aspecto esencial que has propuesto y es el de democracia de la tierra. Por favor, compártenos brevemente cómo es ese concepto para ti.
You know, all my ideas have flown from action and engagement. You know, I don't think in a separated way. So just like ecofeminism has grown from my participation in movements of women protecting the forests and the rivers and the seas, and then I try and understand why, you know, and what are they confronting? What is the worldview they're confronting? 1999 was an interesting year. 95 was the year WTO was passed. Already they were pushing and bullying India and saying the seeds will be ours and you have to change your patent laws. And they were stealing. They were literally stealing our indigenous knowledge. The beautiful neem that we use As a director indica, we use it for pest control. My mother, grandmother, all used it for grains, for clothing. We used to just protect everything without pesticides, with neem leaves. And in '94, they patented it, the US Department of Agriculture and a company called Grace. I come from a valley called Doon Valley, which has beautiful aromatic rice called basmati. A company in Texas patented that. And Monsanto tried to patent our old wheat varieties that do not give gluten allergy. So this phenomena, I call it biopiracy, was happening. And because I was working with our communities on saving seeds and agroecology, I would tell them these stories. So they got together and they created a living democracy movement, very powerful, 5th of June, 1999. They said, who is this WTO to tell us that they have jurisdiction over our ecology and our biodiversity? Who are they to tell us they will own our seeds? And then they wrote postcards to the WTO. They wrote postcards to Monsanto. They wrote postcards to the US government. You know, what makes you so desperate to steal the resources of the poor? You know, we have a way of conflict resolution. You know, we have always trees in the village, and under the trees, people sit and make community decisions. And they said, we understand there must be a reason why you're stealing. Come and tell us gently under our banyan tree. And we will, if you're really desperate and you need it, we will let you have it. But come and explain to us why you're stealing. So this huge campaign took place, and this movement called Living Democracy grew. That year in November, movements of the world got together and stopped the WTO in Seattle. Our slogan was, our world is not for sale. And then the journalists would always say, oh, the anti-globalizers know what they're against. They don't know what they're for. I said, no, we know what we are for. We are for the earth. We are for our rights. We are for our communities. We are for our sovereignty. Therefore, you cannot destroy any of that. And I wrote the book, Earth Democracy, in reply to all those journalists who tried to make us look stupid and make us look like we were merely anti a phenomena, when the phenomena was anti our lies. And I think the best I can do, Gloria, is share with you some paras from my book, Earth Democracy. And the thing about Earth Democracy is, it is an umbrella that brings everyone together. I see it as the counter and alternative to what I call ecological apartheid. Apartheid is the word from South Africa, which means separation. You know, you, the blacks, are separate from us. You can never come near us, and you're less than us. Therefore, you will not have rights. So apartheid regime was created on separation. This colonial, colonizing, Baconian idea that nature is dead is based on eco-apartheid, that we are separate from nature, we are not part of nature, and nature is dead and living. And we create the condition. By stealing from nature, we pretend we've created what nature gives us, whether it's the seeds or it's the minerals. It could be anything that nature gives us. So I see that the world that is causing havoc everywhere, including in Colombia, including in India, is a world of ecological apartheid and limitless greed. Ecological democracy is basically an antidote to that destructiveness for a new regeneration. So let me conclude with sharing with you a few paras from my book, Democracy. Democracy protects the ecological processes that maintain life and the fundamental human rights that are the basis of the right to life, including the right to water, the right to food, the right to health, the right to education, and the right to jobs and livelihoods. Democracy is based on the recognition of and respect for all life of all species and all peoples across their cultural diversity. Over the past 3 decades, my conception of a democracy has been concretized through my engagement with diverse movements. Ecology movements, conservation movements, animal rights movements have based their struggles around the intrinsic worth and value of all species. Human rights movements have been rooted in the recognition of the universal human rights of all people. In our democracy, the concern for human and non-human species come together because we are interconnected. We are interbeings. We are 100 trillion microbes in our gut. We would not be alive without the bacteria and the viruses. Yeah. So human and non-human species come together and intervene in a coherent, non-conflicting whole that provides an alternative to the worldview of corporate globalization based on scarcity, competition, and conflict. It gives rights only to corporations and the billionaires and takes away the rights of all species, the rights of all people, which is why we have violence and conflict. Earth democracy connects us through the perennial renewal and regeneration of life, from our daily life to the life of the universe. Earth democracy is the universal story of our times in our different places. It pulsates with the limitless potential of an unfolding universe, even while it addresses the real threats to our very survival as a species. It is hope in times of hopelessness. It brings forth peace in times of wars without end, and it encourages us to love life fiercely and passionately at a time when leaders and the media breed hatred and fear. I send you love, and I send you solidarity. We will create a new world.
Gracias, Vandana. Por último, vemos que tu lucha ha sido por resignificar muchos conceptos que la cultura capitalista hegemónica ha querido imponernos. ¿Cómo vives y sientes tú la poesía en tu vida para finalizar esta charla?
For me, poetry has become my understanding of life, because brilliant scientists created the word for self-organized. The objectification of the world was basically, these are dead things and we'll manipulate them as we will. And then some scientists started to articulate what living systems are like, and they're self-organized. And Spanish and Chilean scientists, Maturana and Varela, came up with the word autopoiesis as the self-organization of life. Poiesis is, of course, poetry. Writing the poetry of life that Jairo does with pen and paper, I do with seeds and biodiversity. And, we built up a beautiful farm. It began with seed saving, but you plant a few seeds, other species come, the pollinators come, wild plants come, medicinal plants come, and our farm of seed saving has become a beautiful forest. It's become a beautiful sanctuary. And from it has grown a beautiful Earth University. So for me, poetry is seeing poetry in every element of life in self-organized freedom. The tiniest microbe, the smallest seed, the small community, a woman in a remote mountain, or a scientist doing honest science. As Einstein said, there is no difference between true science and poetry. It's the non-science, the anti-science that violates everything, that destroys the poetry of life, and therefore has given us the ecological crisis and the social crisis. So let's all be autopoietic.
Muchas gracias por todos tus mensajes y por este mensaje tan particular para este Festival Internacional de Poesía de Medellín, que lleva la poesía a cada uno, para que cada uno aplique la poesía en su vida de manera creadora. El Festival Internacional de Poesía de Medellín les agradece su presencia en este acto, en esta transmisión. Les invita a continuar en las transmisiones del día de hoy del 32º Festival Internacional de Poesía de Medellín y a visitar nuestra página web www.festivaldepoesiademedellin.org, también a comentar y a compartir nuestras publicaciones con el hashtag 32FIPMed. Nuestra cordial invitación para que a las 3 de la tarde nos acompañen en el panel Hijos de la Tierra, Resistencia de los Pueblos Originarios y Supervivencia, en el que intervendrán las poetas Ángela Mavisoy de la Nación Kamsá, Colombia, Carmen Tocay de la Nación Maya Cachiquel de Guatemala y el biólogo Raúl Montenegro de Argentina, también Premio Nobel Alternativo. Muchas gracias por su presencia. Queden con nosotros. Feliz día.